Hello and welcome. I'm Ariel Grace, and this is Creatively Free. Today, we are talking about one of the topics that is truly closest to my heart and my way of being, which is energy, empathy. I call it the energy of empathy, and also related to empathy. What's the difference between empathy, sympathy, and compassion? And how does that show up in how we interact in our physical felt sense with bioresonance and physical symptoms? I identify as an empath, and this has shown itself in various ways. I didn't know as a child personally that that was only a percentage of the population, that the way that I experienced empathy is different than how others do. And then it wasn't even a thing for a lot of folks. I've taught in this discipline of what empathy is, and it's not something that they can fully relate to with their genetic makeup. So it's empathy in itself is something that is a middle zone around what is inherent and felt sense oriented and what can be taught around empathy. There's a range. Now, I'm actually going to be offering a online e-course, two different ones that cover areas of these topics because it's such a broad and in-depth, advanced topic that you can go into. One of them is called The Energy of Empathy, and I go into much more detail than I'll go through today on this episode. And then I also have one that's called Blissful Boundaries. And it covers some similar topics because of this differentiation that a lot of empaths and HSPs have, where boundaries, the difference between my being and your being from our senses, are confusing. And we often pick up on and actually embody other people's stuff. And so, learning how to discern and decipher between what's yours and what's others is absolutely the beginning and an ongoing practice for empaths and HSPs. And then learning how to set healthy boundaries and negotiate and work through those in energy, in language, and body, and all forms is an area that I have had a lot of life learnings in and am pleased to be able to share with others. So let's dive in. Empathy. What's the definition of empathy? The simplest one is to be able to walk in another's shoes. That's the one that is most popularized in tech design, and Forrester talks about it in terms of customer experience. And that's all well and good. But let's dive underneath the surface of that. It's not just a simulation experience of imagining that you can walk in another's shoes and feel the way they, feel their different feelings and experiences and understand their way in the world. Empathy can actually be a physical, felt experience of an emotional resonance with another that you don't even have a cognitive awareness of. So it's not necessarily for empaths always by choice to feel that bioresonance of another person's emotional state or feeling. Now, with sympathy, there's a huge difference. Again, there's layers of conscious and subconscious awareness that one must walk through as they practice understanding their own empathy, sympathy, compassion, abilities, tendencies, and learnings. A lot of folks in therapy and healing modalities will actually argue a lot about whether empathy is real, whether we have other senses, whether we can actually feel what others feel, or whether that's all a made up thing. And we more so have codependence tendencies because we are feeling as a child like we have some wounded child expression that may suggest that we want to feel what others feel when in actuality we don't. That's one theory. I'm not here to tell you what's right or wrong like any topic. I'm here to tell you my perspective, what I've learned, and what I've experienced as an empath myself. It can be very nuanced and advanced to learn what you pick up and what you are carrying related to other beings or peoples or creatures in your life. I'll give you a really concrete example. The best way to identify the type of one of the main types of empathy that I have is physical empathy. And that means that subconsciously I will use uh, body tension essentially to store or mirror symptoms that other people in my life that I've encountered are processing. And that could be, and this is a super important topic to me because I know a lot of healers, therapists. I actually know a chiropractor who left her practice because she was starting to develop the physical symptoms of patients and take on a lot of their energetic issues. So I have developed both clearing and boundary practices that I practice daily that I will be able to share in some future episodes. But an example that I wanted to share is I've had that experience where I was working with a client and they told me about a ailment that they experienced in their arm. Later that day, I experienced an ailment in my arm. And when that happened, because I was still new to understanding discernment and what to do, I actually felt what I call spiritual fear. But I felt fear about that, picking up that other person's symptom. And I responded at the time, inquiring with a Reiki master if I needed to do Reiki training to help work through that. And while I did enroll in Reiki training and became level 2 certified Reiki practitioner, I learned that my own energy practices needed to be more advanced and nuanced than any guidance outside of myself. So it was an interesting process and can have a lot of value in different ways, but didn't really help me with this particular experience that I had had. And this wasn't the first time that I had experienced this. And I later learned that I've experienced physical empathy or physical sympathy or physical compassion. And so I want to go back through the definitions with you so you can start to learn the nuances here. Sympathy is more oriented around pity, while as empathy is oriented around just a mirroring, a true mirroring of an emotional state to state. And whether we put language around the emotions doesn't matter, but that's the intent that I'm sharing with you. There's a neutrality of pain transferring pain, or it could be pleasure, actually, just an energetic state in one being transferring and bioresonance transference to another being so that they feel that same resonance. That would be what I would consider empathy and physical transference of empathy through energetic means. Now, sympathy, that is where we have the emotional charge added on of pity, of feeling bad for the other. So you can experience physical sympathy as well, which would be a little bit different than physical empathy in how I'm defining it, and probably is more tied to what a lot of folks in the industry call more of codependent patterning. Now, another example would be compassion, physical compassion. So, compassion is you put in our there's a word called conation, which is the brain's process of translating thought to action. Conation. So when you have the felt sense of empathy and experience that, everyone can respond differently to the action orientation around that. Now, we probably in our bodies, I'm very much interested in somatics or body centered learning as well, and do a lot of work in that space. And so our bodies have learned to store patterning, just like everything is mostly habitual in terms of how we store and process and move emotional responses. And the compassion orientation would be if you, let's say, for me, it's if my daughter is just got hurt and scraped her knee. The place that I experience physical compassion is in my womb. I feel like a tension and discomfort. Or let's say you're watching a movie and you feel like, emotional about somebody's experience, but they aren't actually experiencing. Maybe you feel sadness, but when you observe what's happening to them, they're not necessarily sad in that moment. Okay, so that's not empathy, because your empathy implies that you're feeling the same state. However, you feel a compassion, and generally compassion is an orientation towards action. Like, if you could, you would give them a hug or maybe do some type of action to support them. So those are all my definitions around the difference between empathy, which is more neutral mirroring of emotional states, and sympathy, which is more judgment oriented, can be looking down on, can be maybe well intended but layered versions, so mixed energetic. And then compassion, which is a desire to act on, and not necessarily a mirroring of, and can be a felt sense that is different than the other in terms of where it's stored in your body and the emotional experience. Compassion is usually more boundaried in that way. So that's the overall summary that I wanted to share with you around these different experiences. Now, in the trainings that I'll be sharing online, I'll be giving more practices, more subsets around healthy and unhealthy experiences of the energy of empathy and tendencies that we may do around that are healthy or unhealthy expressions, like how we develop in our life to use our energy and attention and awareness to mirror and respond with others. Today, I would love you to walk away with an inquiry around your own tendencies, your genetic makeup. If you identify as an empath, how do you take on and experience others' emotions? Is there conscious or subconscious tendencies that you might experience? That's what I invite you to consider, especially if you're in the healing therapy, body work modalities. If you have been struggling with how to work with some of these things that may be happening to you because you have empathy tendencies as well, then just know that you are much more empowered if you haven't already done clearing and boundary work than you had perhaps thought. That there are really nurturing and healthy ways to work with this when it comes up. I encourage, if this is the first time that you've, had the opportunity to think about this, that you address that this is happening without fear now, and really get curious about how you can work with it rather than, run away from or quit. When I was in my coach training, I actually asked the founder of the program that I was in about this tendency because as a child, it really was the main reason why I was afraid of going into healing modalities is not having the tools to work with this physical way of being. And he told me that I should just deal with it. So he didn't even really have any answers for me. And that may be because he personally wasn't a physical empath and didn't relate to the weight that I was carrying in an actual physical sense of carrying the burdens of conscious and subconscious commitments that I may have made throughout my life to carry on more than what was mine of other people's stuff, both pain, emotions, and sensations. Um, so I know if this is somebody that has, been doing coaching training for 30 years and still can't relate to what I was bringing up, that this is something that we really need to talk about more and be willing to explore, even if it seems sort of out there or something that isn't fully understood in the science communities. In the healing and energy communities, it's been understood for a very, very long time. And and there are ways to empower people through energy clearing, consciousness, and boundary setting that make it much more healthy for empaths to experience life and to thrive and to not be afraid of their physical tendencies and makeup any longer.